The very next one is Tony Ennis. He is a multiple-time founder, a product builder. He is a hypermedia maximalist. And he is here to talk to us about the platform and bridging the gap from SPAs, just using the platform and a style sheet. So please welcome to the stage, Tony Ennis. Go get him.
Hello, I'm Tony, and this is my talk. So, let me put that down. So I've been a web developer for almost 20 years now, and when I first got into web development, I kind of fell in love with the simplicity of HTML and CSS, and the fact that within a couple of hours, I was able to build kind of static websites, and I could kind of create elements on the page and make them do things, and it was kind of magical, and that has sustained my career since then. Today I run an agency, and we build web applications, which are a little bit more complex than the work that I was doing when I first started learning. But I've kind of been obsessed with this idea or this question of, would it be kind of conceptually possible to build the kind of modern web applications that we build today with the same level of simplicity, conceptual simplicity that I was using when I first started learning to code. And so that's what this talk is going to be about. I'd like this to be kind of a revisiting every few years talk. If the Big Sky guys will have me back in a couple of years, I'd love to come back and kind of take stock and see where we are then. But yeah, I'm going to explore this idea and hopefully come out with some new information or knowledge by the end of it. So first thing I'm going to do is probably piss some people off. I'm going to make a very nuanced topic much simpler, and I'm going to come up with this new term, which is a moderately dynamic web application. So obviously there's a lot of nuance here, but for the purposes of this talk, I'm going to be exploring the section on the right here, which is moderately dynamic, and lots of different ways you could define this. My particular definition is that in a moderately dynamic web app, UI updates a little. In a highly dynamic one, the UI is constantly updating, and in moderately dynamic, you kind of have isolated UI components, whereas with highly dynamic, you've got interlinked or interconnected components. So examples of highly dynamic apps would be Google Sheets, spreadsheets, creative tools. Moderately dynamic would be, honestly, I think 70 to 80% of most software that web developers work on today is kind of in this moderately dynamic category. So what I'm going to do is kind of go section by section. If you're building a web app today, there's things that the platform doesn't give you just yet. A good example is file uploads or multi-selects. So that's kind of in the UI elements category. Then, of course, smooth async content. So a lot of HTMX people here. That's why we use HTMX, is because links and forms don't really give us the level of kind of slickness that we want. And the last category is Frontend State. And I personally think that web components are great, but there's still kind of a dead zone there that needs to be supported at some point, or I would like to see supported. So going to explore some ideas there as well. So let's start with the UI elements. Here's a list of HTML elements that have kind of been released over the years. Most of these are pretty old, actually. They've been around for a long time. And for most of the history of the web, what would happen is standards bodies would come up with specs. They would release the spec. The browser guys would go, implement it, and then not a lot would happen. So it would be kind of released, and then not a lot of kind of additions made. But something has happened over the last 2 to 3 years, and some other guys have alluded to this as well. I personally think there's a working group called OpenUI who've been working on a lot of these kind of ideas. And I have noticed that the amount of progress that's happened in this space in the last 2 years, for me, is like equivalent to the previous 10 or 15 years. So we now have this like new kind of phase or new set of phases for a lot of these elements, which is they're getting full styling support and advanced interactivity. So I'm going to go through a couple that have happened recently, literally kind of earlier this year, and there was a big batch in 2023 as well. And I'm going to caveat it that a lot of what I'm going to demo and talk about now couldn't really go into a web app today because it doesn't have wide enough support. But I think that's kind of progressing really fast, and in a couple of years, you're going to see this reach kind of 80, 90%, or 90, 95% coverage. So for comparison, we've got the simple guys at the top, which is text field, checkbox, button. They've been there for kind of a very long time, and they're fully stylable. This is what this table looked like in 2023. So you couldn't really do good styling support to kind of the level that you might get from, an SPA or like a really nice component library in React land. But as of earlier this year, a lot of these things have turned green. Popovers, modals, selects. I know Robbie kind of spoke about some of these things earlier on, and Alex alluded to them as well. But the deeper that I dug in for this talk, the more I realized that the kind of current progress that's happening in the space is like, yeah, crazy. So I want to talk about some of those things. So let's start with popovers. Just to explain what a popover is first. You see them every web app, really. There's lots of different, I mean, it's the idea that you have a button or a trigger that can launch a div that has content in it, and you see them in lots of places. Rich text hints, search suggestions, inline hints, drop-downs, kebab menus, they're all over the place. So this is actually an iframe. This is a live demo of what you can do today. So you, with a very small amount of HTML attributes, can get behavior that you would be used to seeing in a kind of very polished like SPA. So you can see when I click on this element, you can see very simple kind of rich text tooltip or a hint, but you can see it's got all of the things that the animations that you have come to expect from CSS. We've got transform origin, we've got our box shadows, we've got all of those nice kind of stylable affordances. And all it takes to do this is a popover attribute on the div, and then a target which references the ID of the div. It's that simple. Now, there's another thing that's in the works at the minute, which is a slight modification from popover target to a thing called interest target. And basically, to kind of like simplify this, the only thing you need to know is this triggers on hover. So this gives you the same thing that popover target gives you, except for it triggers on hover and it has all the same stuff. And what's really cool is you can like set the timings and all that. The things that you would previously have used a JavaScript library to do, you can now do in a single line of CSS. So that's some of the stuff that's happening for popovers. What have you got next? Modals, yes. So again, another example here of a modal that I think looks, again, on par with most of the things that you would see in JavaScript world. Comes up from the bottom. You can style the backdrop. It's a pseudo element that you can add kind of transparency to. And this gives you multiple things. So the first thing is it gives you light dismiss. So if you click outside, it'll dismiss it. And then also these buttons can also dismiss it as well. And again, no JavaScript here, all just HTML attributes. You put closed by any on your dialog. Again, dialog's been around for a long time. These are called command invokers. And this is a whole new category of kind of things that you're going to be able to do. But the simplest one, I think, is this. Is basically just send a command for the confirm dialog. The command is show modal. And that is how you do a HTML-only modal. Selects. Oh, sorry, before I do that. I'm not going to go into detail on all these things, but just for anyone who's ever tried to implement a modal system or any kind of popovers, these are all the things that you would have previously had to worry about, which have now been handled, thankfully, by the guys building the browsers, which is awesome. Selects are probably the most commonly used, I would say, in my experience at least, kind of a form element, and they are kind of woefully underpowered, I would say, historically. And so as of 2024, basically what you could do is you could have a single select. You could do typing with a data list, but it wasn't very good. People didn't really use it. You could technically do select type equals multiple for multi-select. Actually, I think that last tick is incorrect because I don't think you can do typing in a multi-select. But as of earlier this year, the single select is now fully stylable, and you can do advanced interactivity, and I'll talk about that in a second. And I think there's a reasonable path in the next couple of years, given the progress that the guys are making at the minute. I actually kind of tagged Una, who is the DevRel lead in Google for Chrome, and was asking her about when we might see support for stylability on multi-selects and type to search, and she said they're definitely in the works. So maybe there's a 2026 that we can look forward to being able to do a fully platform-only combo box, which would be awesome. So just to look at what that actually looks like, I think this is probably the most impressive platform feature that I've seen in terms of how thoughtful the implementation is. So on the left here, you can see some examples of drop-downs. That second one in particular, you notice, has some images in it. And you can do all of these options now. The options element can take basically whatever HTML you want to put in it. There's a few limitations, but mostly you can do whatever rich text content you want to put in there. You can. But I want to draw attention to this selected content element, which I think is pretty genius. So what this does is when you select an element, it will effectively clone the contents from the option inside of the button or inside of the selected content element. So without writing lots of complex JavaScript or front-end templates to kind of build your UI out, you could effectively just have a specific style for how you want that option to show when it's in the button, and then a style for how you want to show when it's in the select itself. So this is the kind of thing that we can look forward to. This is already released. Now, I think it's like 60% coverage, and it's behind a feature flag on Safari, so it's going to take a little while. But again, just a sign of, I think, what things that are to come over the next couple of years. So that is a kind of brief foray into the UI element side of things. Now I want to talk about smooth async content. I'm not going to labor on this because I'm sure there's been lots of talk already about HTMX and hypermedia and generalizing hypermedia controls. I'm just going to do a quick demo to just get this across. This is the Stripe dashboard. So this is an SBA. So you notice that a few things happen when you click on a link in a left menu in the Stripe dashboard. The first is that the clicked item that you clicked highlights without waiting for the network. So immediately you know that is the active element. The second thing is that you see a loading state. So you have a little spinner in the target area. And the last is that the rest of the state of the page doesn't get disturbed. So it's not replaced by the new content coming in. How might we do this with pure HTML or with the platform-only solution? The answer is remarkably simple. Now, this is the set of proposals that Alex and Carson are working on, which is the triptych proposals. But you can see here with the simple addition of a target element, this target element already exists in the HTML spec. The only problem is it only works with iframes. So if we can work on getting this extended, that will mean that we'll be able to do partial page replacement, and we'll be able to specify a div. And that solves 3 of the 4 problems on the left in one fell swoop. And that's just, again, I think a lot of our kind of preconceptions as to how fundamentally complex these things are, I think are a little bit off because we've been dealing with lots of abstractions over the years. But fundamentally, the kind of conceptual compression that you can get here from a single attribute, I think, is pretty remarkable. The last one here is clicked item highlighting. This is a proposal of mine. This doesn't exist, but we do already have the concept of using the name attribute in HTML to group together a list of elements. So there is a foreseeable or a conceivable future where we're able to group together elements and then style them with CSS. And this would give us instant clicked item highlighting. If you can imagine, you click on a link, it immediately gets a loading pseudo selector, and then you can style that with your CSS. And you don't have to kind of worry about any kind of JavaScript state management or anything. So I think, again, I've sucked some nuance out of this, but largely speaking, I think you get the idea that a lot of the ways that the browser falls short right now when it comes to kind of smooth partial page loading are only a couple attributes away from effectively being nicely solved. And this is what most of my apps look like today when we're rolling a new one out. We just load in HTMX. It's a nice polyfill that solves most of our problems, and that's kind of it. What's my time like? 8. Okay, cool. I'm doing all right. Last section, front-end state. So native elements and web components. I like web components, but I'm not a kind of web component zealot. I think there are a lot of things that we need to do that web components feel just like overkill for. I think that there's a kind of a dead zone. So we already spoke about native elements and the progress that's been made over there. But I think there's kind of a dead zone in the middle with a couple of types of things that you might want to work on that don't really, for me, fit smoothly into web components or native elements. So this is a personal kind of idea that I have of how the web might evolve to account for that. So one pattern that we see a lot, these are some examples. So this is a character count example where you type into an input and then you see a little kind of incrementing field at the bottom right that tells you how many characters you've written. Another one is a booking dialog. So again, we can use popovers here to show the dialog itself, but when you want to click on a button and increment the kind of variable and have that affect the original button, there's no nice way of doing that without writing a web component. And for me, that kind of feels like overkill. So let me tell you why. I think some of the things across React land and kind of HTML first land that people value, as is evidenced by the libraries that are kind of popular, are locality of behavior, low complexity overhead, and minimum boilerplate. So you don't want to have to write a load of code to do very simple, conceptually simple things. Using the character count example, this is what the HTML looks like, which is nice and simple. But this is about 50 lines of JavaScript to do something reasonably straightforward. I think I'm strawmanning a little here. I think Cursor actually wrote this code, and you could probably do it in a few less. But the kind of idea is the same, which is that you tend to not need to actually write that much code. And if you were writing this in Alpine, for example, this is what it would look like. I don't know if we have any people in the room who use Alpine or something similar, but for me, this is nice, but it goes slightly too far and encroaches into what you might use a web component for. in my opinion, the moment that you're dealing with objects in your kind of front-end state, you're starting to kind of, get into kind of complexity territory. And so we've been working on a library for a while called Mini.js, which kind of takes this idea, but effectively intentionally leaves out some functionality. And where we got to with that was actually, we kind of ended up at a place where we kind of asked ourselves, what might a platform-first Alpine look like? And this is the idea I want to explore here. So the browser has on events and has had on events for quite some time. Literally, I think it's like 20 years we've had these events, but they've kind of fallen out of favor. The browser can also keep track of state changes and use JavaScript to set variables. So you can literally have an input that has an onChange event, which sets a first name value to the value of the input, similar for dropdowns. So we're 2/3 of the way there. The thing that the browser does not have is a way to make your UI reactive to changes in that state. So if you set a variable, you can't let your UI update in response to that variable. And that's what I've been exploring as to how might that look, or what might that look like, or how might that work. I really like this pattern. We've been using it quite a lot, and it goes with the grain of the web. You can see it's quite declarative. It's reasonably readable. I think for most people who are used to reading HTML, it seems pretty kind of understandable. So this is a character counter, the top one. So you pass in the initial count. The text area onChange event sets the count variable, and then the P has a JavaScript text attribute. Now, the idea here is that you can kind of do a lot of things with just 3 attributes, which is text, class, and value. So value for form elements, class for any element, and then text would actually put that text into the div itself. And we've done a bunch of different kind of experiments here. So this is actually what this looks like today. Now, in our experiments, what we realized, and this, I don't know if this kind of speaks to the genius of the kind of platform or the standards authors already, but basically the thing that we created maps almost exactly to the idea of a web component. So the only difference is this would be a state. Web components have to have a dash or a hyphen in them. So this looks like a state element. This web component, or this functionality that you see here, consists of about 100 lines of JavaScript code in a web component. Now, there's a lot of kind of edge cases that would need to be accounted for. We're going to launch this probably towards the end of the year with all of the edge cases accounted for. But this is just a really nice, simple pattern for adding very light front-end state that I think more people should be exploring, and I think fills that kind of a gap. We still use JSX actually quite a bit. We still use React quite a bit. I mentioned at the beginning the distinction between highly dynamic and moderately dynamic. JSX is a great templating language, and particularly for when you need composability, when you need complex state. I discovered this a while ago, and it blew my mind, and I think more people should know about it. This is a no-build version of, effectively, of React. It has some very, very slight modifications in syntax, but you can import this from esm.sh. It's 7 kilobytes. There's no build step. It gives you render. It gives you a lot of the React hooks that you might want. And it uses the platform. So it uses template literals, it uses JavaScript modules. These are all things that have been added to the platform in the last couple of years. So what we do often is if we have an app that's 90% HTML, but there's like a message page or something on it, we'll load this in, and it allows us to do like islands of React where we need them. So I think this is a pattern that more people should be using. Wrapping up, where I'm at 2 minutes. I want to apologize because I kind of rushed there. I had a lot to fit in, and that's the first time I've actually gone through the entire talk end to end. So just to get the idea across here, this is kind of what a web app that might look like today if you were to kind of start from scratch and wanted to support a lot of these really nice UI elements. In a couple of years, I think actually I missed Robbie's talk, but I hear that he did something very similar. A couple of years, I think you might see that go down. So maybe you still need something for date pickers and for file uploads. But eventually, I think there's a reasonable future where we get to the state, which is the premise of the talk, which is just the platform and a style sheet, and you can build beautiful, interactive, slick web apps without leaving your HTML. That's been my talk. Thank you for listening. And yeah, I'm Tony Ennis on Twitter if you want to reach out to me there if any of these ideas kind of appeal to you and want to chinwag on it. And then also, these are some of the websites that I've been working on. So thank you. I'll leave that there.
You can leave it there. We got people to take care of that. Hey,
thank you.
Nicely done.
Cheers.
So have I not been paying attention previously, but it seems like the platform has just, the rate of improvement on the platform has just gone crazy in the past 3 to 5 years. Was I asleep before, or is that fundamentally different than it has been?
No, I mean, it's totally different. I don't know exactly what's happened. I'm sure that people who are closer to it than I would be able to tell, but I really think this OpenUI working group is a big part of it. You should check it at openui.com, but basically they've gone down through a lot of the UI elements I spoke about, and they've effectively kind of, written specs for them, talked about the existing patterns, and they're really, really pushing, and they're really listening to people. There's a 2025 State of HTML survey that went out during the week, and if you read through that, you really get the sense that they're really trying to, pave the path, so to speak. They're trying to actually make HTML really useful for building these like really nice, dynamic UI elements. But yeah, I don't know what's happened in the last few years. I'm just hoping that it continues.
Yeah, no kidding.
But yeah.
And so with this improvement of the platform, do you anticipate any of the big dogs like React, Vue, Svelte, anything like that? Do you anticipate any of them taking a step back and saying like, hang on, we can rip a bunch of this stuff out and rely on the platform? Or are they too far gone and we need something like you're building now?
I don't know. I actually think the biggest thing that I would love to see happen is design engineers start to go, hang on a second. I mean, I think the reality is that most of the good design engineers work in React, right? Like, it's very rare. Actually, I don't know if Ronan's here, but Ronan put out a library a couple months ago called Base Code. And it's really nice, and it's really polished, and it's all HTML first. But I think it's quite rare to see people like that, use the platform, because honestly, historically, React has been a better option. Like, there's way more that you can do. And so for me, that would be the kind of thing, the domino that would tip it over and would make people start kind of reassessing and going, do I really need to wrap my entire UI in a meta framework? Like React, as I said, React is great, JSX is great, but the idea that you build your entire front end in React, I think for the next 5 years seems reasonable. If you extrapolate out far enough in the future, it just feels to me almost inevitable, particularly after having done the research, that like once a lot of those other things become really, really easy to do, not even with JavaScript, I think people are going to start to go like, why are we using React anymore? Why are we using Meta Framework on the front end?
Boy, I hope so. Tell the people one last time the name of your project and how they can help.
My project. Oh, sorry. Yeah, Mini.js. So, I mean, yeah, I've been working on a JavaScript library for a year and a half. We haven't launched it because we've been using it in production with clients, run a software agency. I think it's pretty close to being kind of ready. Ironically, we effectively are going to rewrite most of it as a web component, because we did this circular thing where we did it first as a JavaScript library, used it. It was effectively a simpler version of Alpine. And then we kind of came full circle and realized that state element is such a neat encapsulation. So yeah, anyway, I'll be launching that probably in the next couple of months. So yeah, I mean, just use it. Tell me what you guys think. And yeah, I'd love to see more people kind of taking this approach. And
I love it.
Yeah.
Y'all give it up for Tony.
Thanks.
Great job.